palatial studios at Emerson College in beautiful downtown Boston. This is the Jeff Santos Show on the Revolution's Jeff.
Hour 2 of the Jeff Santos Show. Welcome to it. We've got a great hour for you today. Actually, it's jam-packed second hour of the program. Kevin Paul DuPont, great hockey writer for the Boston Globe, will join us at about 49 minutes past the hour. We'll also talk to our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield, a great progressive journalist, independent, and really one of the best enterprise.
Greed for life, for money, for love, knowledge, has marked the upward surge of mankind, and greed, you mark my words, will not only save Teldar Paper, but that other malfunctioning corporation called the USA. Thank you very much.
That, of course.
This is the Jeff Santos Show.
34 minutes past the hour. It is indeed the Jeff Santos Show that you're tuned into. 772-925-8206, the phone number to join us. You can email me, Jeff, with a J, at revolutionboston.com. Check us out on both Facebook and Twitter at Jeff Santos Show. But now we go to the great Pacific Northwest, where they deserve a hockey team. And maybe if any of these teams in the South decide to fly the coop, Carolina, Miami, maybe they'll end up in the Pacific Northwest, where we find a great journalist, Capitol Hill Times, Daily Kos, and of course,
Yes, Jeff, I'm here too.
Very good, very good. Always working, man, always working. Well, lots to talk about. We get obviously a whole war issue that is now front and center. And, you know, I wanted to talk to you, and I know there's a lot of news going on, particularly about the legalization of marijuana and so forth. But Seattle has always been, you know, in the last few years anyways, we saw what happened with the Attorney General on the immigration and the Muslim ban. We saw what happened at $15 minimum wage. You guys have always led. And I asked this to our caller, Mark from San Francisco earlier. You know, with all this movement here, blowing up the Air Force base that, you know, supposedly had the chemical weapons in Syria, are we now at a point where, people in Seattle are going to try to lead here as they have in so many other ways, and include the Bernie Sanders area as well? Or is
breaking so new right now that it's hard to say, but I think in general, not very happy about the direction that things are going. And it is a place where we've seen a lot of anti-war protests in the past. I know during the Iraq War, there was one march here that, was estimated at 75,000 people. So it has a long history and tradition of peace marches against the Vietnam War, marches against the Iraq War, and I don't think that tradition is going to change in the Northwest. I mean, it's just we're a place that feels like we have a different vision maybe for where this country should go, and that goes for a lot of the people. It feels like November, and you can't really tell what season it is. I mean, we're a very tough group of people, tough mentally, to be able to live in an environment like this. So I think living in the environment of the Trump administration is something that, it's kind of like living through a Seattle winter. You think it's never going to end, and it looks blue all of the time. But eventually, you have to toughen yourself and face the reality of what you're dealing with. And in case of the Trump administration, I think that it's seen as a backward step, in a lot of ways. This is a progressive area, and I think people are afraid that, much like people probably felt when Ronald Reagan was elected, that, that we're going backwards somehow. That a lot of the social, political progress that's been made over the last few generations is maybe slipping away a little bit on the national scene there. So people are very concerned about what's happening in Washington, D.C., and everybody is watching it very closely, Jeff. That's for sure.
Well, let me ask you this, because we got limited time this week, unfortunately. But do you sense that there is the pushback, Mark and I sort of email each other over the week, the surprising pushback on the cannabis issue. There obviously still have not been a lot of overtures from Cantwell and Murray to Senator Sanders.
As I wrote in my latest Capitol Hill Times article, the cannabis activists have long been on guard about the election of Donald Trump, only because although he totes a states' rights line when it comes to, laws about, transgender bathrooms and during the campaign, on the campaign trail, he said that legalization of marijuana was a states' rights issue, but unfortunately there are people in his administration, including Jeff Sessions, who have made a bunch of statements recently saying that no, to quote Jeff Sessions, quote, "I'm definitely not a fan of the expanded use of marijuana. States, they can pass the laws they choose. I would just say it does remain a violation of federal law to distribute marijuana throughout any place in the United States, whether a state legalizes it or not." So then you have Sean Spicer up there comparing, the use of marijuana with addiction to opiates, which is, he clearly got that wrong and doesn't know much about the effects of THC. But this is something that people have been worried about, and the general feeling has been, oh, well, they'll never actually try to, crack down on the states that have legalized marijuana. But if you look at the statements that are coming from the administration, it's not looking good. And so, yes, there is a pushback here, and there is some worries about what could happen. But given the makeup of our state government and a lot of our local governments here, I just don't see the elected officials backing down on something like this, where the people have voted on Initiative 502 and have legalized marijuana, and people in the state want to preserve their state laws. So I really don't know what the Trump administration has in mind, but the rhetoric doesn't sound good, and it definitely has a lot of people worried here in the Northwest. Not just in Washington State, of course, but in Oregon, California, Colorado. 7 states now that have actually legalized the recreational use. Now, the Trump administration is saying that they're not going to crack down on the medicinal pot programs, and that's because there was a rider in an appropriations bill that denies any funding for that kind of thing. But the Justice Department has been spouting a lot of rhetoric that's anti-marijuana. And the thing is that if you look into it and you talk to legal experts and the political, I really don't know if there's a showdown headed, whether they're going to try to cut federal funding for states like Washington that have legalized marijuana. We'll see, Jeff. But I'm just trying to report on the rhetoric that we're hearing from the White House.
Talking with Mark Taylor-Canfield. Of course, you can reach him, Capitol Hill Times, read his stuff, Daily Kos, and, of course, you can hear him here every other Sunday here on the Jeff Santos Show. I got about 60 seconds, Mark. Are you hearing anybody here concerned that, once again, the Democratic Party not addressing where Bernie wants to take the party? He talked about perpetual war today. Hillary Clinton backed what Trump did in Syria. Your concern here, 30 seconds, my friend.
Yeah, I think people here are worried that the country is headed in the wrong direction in a lot of ways, including what's happening with...
Check him out on Twitter.
We'll see you soon, Jeff.
Thank you, my friend. Mark, we're right back.
Every day, 10 children are killed by gunfire.
Where have all the children gone? Long time passing.
Where have all the children gone? Long time ago.
children gone. Gone to graveyards one by one.
Oh, when will we ever learn? Oh, when will we ever learn?
The killing won't stop unless you help stop it. Call 1-800-WE-PREVENT to find out what you can do.
It is time to go to Milwaukee, WI.
Happy Sunday to you, Jeff.
Great to have you on the show. Well, we get so much to talk about, and I think that one of the big issues that progressives in Wisconsin, Citizen Action, Wisconsin, and of course People's Action, which the umbrella group is dealing with now, is that we have the Republican administration, Mr. Trump, 59 tomahawks in Syria. The conversation on the shows this weekend and obviously over the last few days have been on foreign policy as opposed to some of the issues that you and I talk about, domestic concerns, everything from trade to health care to 4 years of free public university. They all get thrown off. And, you know, we were just talking with Shannon Jackson of Our Revolution. To me, this is a very serious time for progressives to take the mantle, and particularly to those folks that were promised by Donald Trump to, you know, get a better job at a better wage, to have an opportunity to lead a better life. This is the time that Democrats have to stand up, progressives have to stand up and make the distinction between the two parties. Otherwise, we become Republican light and they win. Your thoughts?
Well, we've seen the national security consensus rear its ugly head again this week, Jeff. And so literally the tension is off of, right, the Russia scandal, the healthcare, what is also a scandal in my opinion, and all of the issues with the incredibly, the Supreme Court nominee even, let alone the incredibly dangerous cabinet appointments. And now we have Hillary Clinton, we have major leaders in the House and the Senate on the Democratic side praising Donald Trump for kind of this feel-good, rally-around-the-flag kind of action of lobbing a bunch of Tomahawk missiles at Syria with no strategy whatsoever, and not giving the background, quite frankly, that Syria was destabilized and the horrible humanitarian situation there was caused by our use of force, by our completely unnecessary Iraq war. And we continue to want to kind of have a sanitary use of force where we can use air power or lob missiles, but not actually do the hard work of resolving international conflicts like this. And also, quite frankly, Mr. Trump is all concerned about Syrian children, which he should be, but he's still banning refugees from Syria. So if you want to help Syrian children right now, you're trying to resolve this conflict because force cannot do that. And then you want to actually provide humanitarian assistance to the families of these children. So what Assad did is horrific, but this doesn't do anything, quite seriously. It doesn't even seem to destabilize the airfield as far as we can tell. But I don't know. I'd have to double-check this fact, but I heard on one of the Sunday morning shows someone said that we spent more on these 59 Tomahawk missiles than we would have to spend to resolve the lead crisis in Flint. And I haven't looked at those numbers myself, but it's a bunch of money, obviously, that could be spent much better other than some sort of feel-good, we're still strong, we're still America, we have Tomahawk missiles.
Right. And even though there were a few deaths, the people who did die, for what? How is that going to change anything? We're talking with our good friend Robert Kraig, Executive Director, Citizen Action Wisconsin. We'll take your phone calls. We'll get to Mark in a second here at 772-925-8206. Our good friend Mark from San Francisco. But, you know, I'm thinking, Robert, that, you know, as Sanders said this morning about perpetual war, and Barbara Lee, our guest, 2 weeks in a row, we didn't know this would come up again. You know, there haven't been a lot of people echoing them. And this, to me, is, as you just mentioned, Hillary's there praising it. There are other Democrats that have praised, the move, and this to me, I think, is some time to show, who is on the side of, less of a focus, not only in the Middle East but on foreign policy in general. And as you have said, and you have been, pretty steadfast. It's not that we want to take our eye off of the international concerns, but let's put it in terms of resolving and finding solutions diplomatically. As Barbara Lee and I were talking about earlier, let's put together UN conferences. Let's have Putin and Trump have a summit. Bring in the Chinese. Bring in the Middle Eastern partners. That, to me, should be the focus, not, whether we're going to go to war, more war, whether we're going to, side with Russia or side with other leaders in the Sunni side or the Shia side. To me, all that is insane. Your thoughts?
Yeah, diplomacy is hard work. The Iraq War and everything that's gone after it has made that harder. The creation of ISIS, which is created by the Iraq War, has made it harder. There is no stomach for boots on the ground, nor would that do anything either, because as soon as you reduce the boots on the ground, and many, many people will die, you still have the political situation on the ground. And we should go beyond including Russia and including China. We should be including Iran, quite frankly. And I know that there are extremists in Israel who will hate that, but we need a settlement, quite frankly, that does not rely upon force and war, because there is no way to solve political problems long term through force and war. And so if we're not willing to take Assad out totally, which I don't think we should be, quite frankly, because there's no stomach for it anyway, right? Even if this was possible, a good idea, he controls less than a third of the country. So you don't create a Syrian state where he reimposes his rule. But we have got to, the problem is that we have such a large military, and we have this ridiculous situation of Trump and Republicans saying it's been gutted or underfunded, when we spend double what any other country does. We spend more than the rest of the world combined, that we have this tendency in insoluble problems to use force and try to use cheap force. In other words, we don't risk American lives, as an alternative to the real work of global settlements and dealing with humanitarian crises. And we also have to deal with humanitarian crises on its own terms. We have to deal with the fact that we have this many refugees, and that's destabilized politics in Europe and created Trump-like movements in Europe as well. It's not just here that are nativist and nationalist and anti-immigrant, and therefore highly illiberal and highly unprogressive and shameful.
Talking with my good friend Robert Kraig here on the Jeff Santos Show. The phone number to join us, 772-925-8206. Let's go to San Francisco and talk to our good friend Mark. Mark, you're next with Robert Kraig. How are you? Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday, gentlemen. I wanted to talk about the fact that, there's some concern by Trump about the children dying and people dying over in Syria. But, the real problem is the Republican Party, with their health care plan, is going to kill Americans.
Yep.
And we need to message that you better be concerned about the people you want to throw out of health care and how many Americans are going to die here because of your policies. So we need to really start messaging, because we got real issues coming down the road. Their tax policy is going to be just a huge transfer of wealth from the middle class and poor to the rich. In fact, all their policies are going to be that way. And we really have to focus on what they're doing and not let them get away with it by diversions.
Well, that's a key word, Mark. And Robert, diversion is I think this guy. Last night I was watching Saturday Night Live, and Alec Baldwin, who plays Trump, talked about, see what happens when 59 Tomahawk missiles are blown up. Everything negative about me is off the table. And I really feel that that's a big part of it. It's a diversion, as Mark appropriately said. Democrats have to realize this. As Bernie has, as Barbara Lee has, and a few others. But there's going to have to be a bigger pushback. Because to me, the whole concept that I've been talking about, and you have, and many others, rebuild the Midwest, and not rebuild the Mideast. And I don't think that everybody understands that. It may sound alike, but they're certainly much different.
Well, I'm not against rebuilding the Middle East, frankly. We're not talking about that either. It's like rebuild the Midwest versus destroy the Mideast, right, is actually the scenario here.
Right.
And quite frankly, we have a propagandist in office, and so he is going to feed off of this. And that's a very dangerous situation. He's not kind of the cool, controlled kind of leader that President Obama was. Sometimes people criticize President Obama for being too cool. Mm-hmm. And so he's going to find other ways to use force, and that becomes extremely dangerous, actually. So this is a little like getting him addicted to, oh, my goodness, I can be popular if I go and use force, and so what else can I do to be forceful and be a man, etc.? So this is a very dangerous scenario. The problem is that you have the Hillary Clinton wing of the party, which is different than Hillary supporters. I think there were a lot of Hillary supporters who were not hawkish like her on foreign policy, liked her for other reasons. But there's a wing of this party that is muscular as well and wants to use American force all over the world. And a lot of them are rearing their heads right now, Secretary Clinton included. And so we've got to get off of that. And the problem is we need a very clear critique of Trump to make that happen. And the caller, Mark, is absolutely right. There's no concern coming from Trump about throwing 24 million people off their health care, which would cause the deaths of 28,000 Americans a year, roughly, based on the best research about the relationship between the uninsured and the likelihood of death. And so that's a lot of people, but that will be invisible, which is another problem we have. Where was the concern about the number of Syrian children that have been killed by conventional means? This is a classic kind of emotional reaction to chemical warfare, which is not more deadly than the other forms of warfare. It's more gruesome and it shocks us. But quite frankly, there's been far less concern about the number of Syrian children that are dying every day by conventional means.
Right. A bomb is a bomb, a gun is a gun, and it's not. None of it is good. And to do it now, I want to ask Mark. You have seen the fights. You're a union member. Do you feel in one of the more progressive cities in the world, and maybe the most progressive in America, in San Francisco, is this going to alarm a lot of people? Those who had protested against the war in Iraq, maybe going back to those who protested against Vietnam. San Francisco is well known for this. Is this going to ignite young and old because of the actions this week? I know it's early, but do you think that, and maybe it's needed?
I think it's going to happen again. I mean, basically what we're seeing is a rerun of the Bush administration, a rerun with more dangerous people and more extreme agendas. And it's scary. And I think people in California just feel we're looking at the world in a totally different view from most of the country. And I think people here are really frightened how extreme and how dangerous this administration is. So I definitely see a lot of protests coming out of this city because we've been through this before. We know what's coming, but these people are really scary.
Well, it's interesting, guys. I was reading something yesterday online, when you look at the definition of fascism, and, it's not necessarily the idea of a leader trying to, start a war, but just to ignite it, and then the propaganda that goes along with it, that you need more money for the military. As you said earlier, Robert, we don't need more money for the military. I'm not talking about, paying the actual soldiers and obviously taking care of them when they get hurt. That's separate. But I'm talking about more money for more bombers, more planes, more tanks, more battleships, etc. And we don't. We need to cut back. 65% non-discretionary dollars are now, for the military. That's insane. No other country has that. It's 4 or 5 times more than any of our closest competitors militarily. And again, we don't know all this, but to me, the only way that we can make a clear point is, again, to point back to history, We're doing the show 1987 today, Rewind America version, but we've done 67 and 77, and all these times, we're fighting one war or another. It may be small wars, with Reagan, Nicaragua, El Salvador, or it may be something big like Vietnam. But, everywhere you go, Robert, that's what we're dealing with. It never seems to change. And Democrats, LBJ, Republicans, Bush, Reagan.
Yeah, I agree. And the problem is having this outside the military. It's the opposite of what Trump says and Republicans are saying about the military, tempts us to use it. And now we have someone who is going to get addicted to the idea that I'm popular when I use force. And so this is the worst possible scenario, actually, and quite frankly, using force, in my opinion, is like pouring gasoline on a fire. If you want to increase recruitment for ISIS and help Assad's position, then bomb him and attack him, right? From the United States, from the big superpower in the world, right? It just makes the situation far, far worse and more volatile.
Well, I think, and Mark, you make some great points here. I think that it is time for the Democrats, Robert. I don't know what you guys are going to do at Wisconsin Citizen Action or part of People's Action or what the Sanders folks at Our Revolution are going to do. But to me, I think you need to make the case now and quickly that are we going to spend the next 4 years, the next 2 years to 2018 focused on military and military spending? Or are we going to spend money to people who need it the most? To whether it's the kids in the inner city or kids in rural America or adults who can't find more than 2 or 3 minimum wage jobs, all these kind of things. Because if groups don't make that distinction, I don't think the Democrats have enough cojones, the members of Congress and so forth, to do it on their own.
Well, I think we have a real problem, Jeff, in that there really isn't a well-developed, robust peace movement in the United States right now. And most groups are focused on other things, domestic things, which are extremely important. So perhaps it can come from Bernie and from Our Revolution, from the whole new base and new group of people that Bernie brought in, but that remains to be seen. But as you know, and maybe unfortunately, it has to come later as Trump probably keeps escalating his use of military force now that he's been encouraged to do so by the one thing he cares about, which is his public esteem and reputation, period. That's really all he cares about.
Well, go ahead, Mark.
I just wanted to say that I think it's more important now than ever that we have to have the people rise up. We can't depend on the politicians anymore, especially the millennials who are going to be the ones affected the most. But we really have to rise up and start screaming. And we're at a critical point in this country, and we just have to start fighting back. And it's going to take the grassroots and the people. All of these groups that want to progress this country and do the right thing for everybody, we're going to have to start really rising up.
Well, Mark, you're right on, and sooner rather than later, my friend. Thank you, Mark. And we're talking with Jerry Austin and Herb Boyd here on the Jeff Santos Show. We'll get to Peter in Plant City, Florida in a second. Jerry, let me first start with you. 30 seconds on what that movie meant back then, what it means today. I thought that was an incredible line.
Well, it was an incredible line. If you want to jump ahead today, and you don't even have to substitute the word greed because it still goes on, but you may want to put in gouging. Gouging may be the word for 2017, just in terms of drug companies. Gouging the public in terms of what they're charging for these drugs that they create, and it's anybody that thinks that history doesn't repeat itself hasn't been a voyeur of history, whether it's on drugs and the new drug du jour, or whether it's in terms of the greed and that today you have actually somebody who is a former owner of a drug company basically saying that in capitalism you have to try to get the most money for your product that you can, and it doesn't matter whether that is increasing the profit margin by 100% or 1,000%.
Herb, talk to me. So great points, Jerry. You look at that quote, and that the young people, the character played by Charlie Sheen, loving that. Oh my God! I don't know how effective it was in the African American community, but I mean, to me, that is just sleaze 101. Your thoughts?
No doubt about it. And of course, coming from what you call the top echelon of our society, where the big business, and of course, I think Jerry is absolutely right, compare that to big pharma in terms of drugs today and drugs back in 1986, 87. Because, what happens is that you had the mules and the carriers, and of course, those people who were struggling at the low end of the distribution of the drug. And they were usually the ones who were penalized more than the people who were the big dealers coming in from the outside, dropping it, picking up their cash and disappearing. So it was left to the other people, many of them addicted to the drugs themselves and kind of just surviving and selling in order to feed their own habits and everything. They end up at the mercy of the whole penal system. So you have a situation like, Big Pharma can do its thing, but all of us who are at the mercy of trying to get the drugs to survive in our society, and the costs are almost prohibitively high on some of the more important drugs out there, people trying to treat cancer and what have you. So you have the same kind of dichotomy. The same kind of comparison can be made between the big distributors and everything and those people who are on the lower end of that particular scale who are just struggling to survive.
No doubt. All right, let's take a quick call from Peter. I just got about a minute, Peter, but go ahead. You're next with Jerry Austin and her boy on the Jeff Santos Show.
Boys, just to give you an idea, 1987, Len Bias, first pick in the draft by the
Celtics. From Maryland.
Does a bunch of coke and has a heart attack. Tip O'Neill goes crazy, and we got the war on drugs. You got then you got Highway Ricky Ross. The CIA was feeding him the coke. He made it into crack for distribution because black people in the hood couldn't do coke because it was too expensive. So that's what we had there. Gary Webb talks about it. The New York Times, Washington Post attacked him for it. Now we find out he's right. Today, take a look at heroin. Find me an Afghan vet who was in Afghanistan that can witness one Popeye field we destroyed. We don't destroy any of them. They have record profits. We've got heroin epidemics starting in the U.S. But look at Oxycontin. Now they got the FDA said that you can give your kids under 12 Oxycontin.
No, that's wonderful.
What do you think? Well, right. And that's the problem with it, because a kid doesn't know he's getting hooked on something. He's taking his meds. But it all goes one and one. Where's all that heroin going? All those poppy fields in Afghanistan. Nobody in the U.S. media has not asked that question in 16 years. And it may sound crazy, but you all know Afghan vets. Ask them about that.
Yeah, great point, Peter.
I can't believe nobody else.
I appreciate it, my friend. Just to wrap up, guys, just got about a minute and a half here. Peter makes some good points in terms of how this connects to not only foreign policy, to domestic policy, and what it is yesterday and today. Herb, give me 30 seconds on how we're repeating history, as Jerry talked about. Trump's hero is Ronald Reagan. Are we going to go back to where we were in the late 80s after 7-8 years of Ronald Reagan?
What happened is always interesting to look at the 5 or 10 years after an epidemic to see, the after effects of it. And what happened, and you move into the 1990s, and of course remember the Dark Alliance, in Gary Webb, in the Mercury News,
right.
the whole Rick